The following program is sponsored by Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. This episode of Mosaic is brought to you in part by the Stacy and Mark Levy Center for Israel and Overseas.
Welcome to our 46th season of Mosaic. I'm your host, Susan Shulman Pertnoy. Mosaic is Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County's weekly news magazine, exploring the most critical issues facing Jews here and around the world. The past year and 3 months have seen tragic and historic events take place in Israel. Today, we'll be talking with Michael Oren, Israel's former ambassador to the United States, to look back and forward, discussing the still uncertain future of the Jewish homeland. That's next on Mosaic. We're so proud to celebrate our community visionaries, donors who contribute $1 million or more, serving as an inspiration for all of Jewish Palm Beach. One of the best ways to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred is through education. Learn more about the complex issues that lead to hate at jewishpb.org/standuptohate. Welcome back. Joining us today is former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Michael, welcome actually back to Mosaic.
It's always good to be here. Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
It's really wonderful to have you with us. You've had a fantastic career, but before we talk about it, I wanted you to share with our viewers about your personal life. You were born in New York, raised in New Jersey, and then moved to Israel. So what in your family background and your experiences growing up influenced you?
Well, good. Typical American Jewish family, very assimilated, didn't have a lot of Jewish knowledge. I don't think I knew what the Talmud was or what kashrut was. I didn't growing up at all. And went to synagogue once or twice a year on the high holidays. That was about it, for a couple of hours. But my family, particularly my father, was very Zionist, very much supportive of Israel. And imbued me with that sense of Zionism, certainly. But what really was transformative for me was a series of events that occurred when I was about 9 years old. So we grew up in a working class neighborhood, blue collar, where we were the only Jewish family in the neighborhood. And a Sicilian neighborhood, a really tough neighborhood. It was very important for me to understand international affairs. I probably learned more from that neighborhood than I did from all of my years in university. And I used to get beat up. I used to get beat up for being a Christ killer all the time. I'd come home with a bloody nose and black eyes. And my father, who together with his brother, my Uncle Joe, landed on Normandy Beach and fought all through World War II, and had liberated a concentration camp. And had taken pictures. And there was an album that had these pictures in them. I still carry these pictures in my cell phone. They are very tough pictures, even by Holocaust standards. And my father would open this album and show me the pictures of the stacks of bodies, the skeletons.
Oh my God.
And say, you see that, son? You see that? That's why we need a strong state of Israel. Now, if you're sitting there with a bloody nose and you've just been called a Christ killer, that has a very big impact. So from a very early age, I knew I was going to move to Israel. I hadn't even been there yet. I went off when I was 15 alone to work on a kibbutz. And then I was a little crazy because I would come back and spend every year like shoveling snow. This is not Florida, this is New Jersey.
Right.
Shoveling snow, raking leaves, cutting grass in order to save up enough money during the year to go back to Israel every summer and work for free. That's how crazy it was.
Wow.
So it was only a matter of time, I thought, till I moved to Israel. I had a debate whether to go to college first or go in the army first. And I went to the college first, but then I went right into the army. And that's how I ended up here.
That's what a powerful example. I mean, to have your father show you these horrible bodies, and then you're bleeding from the nose. It's
very powerful.
To have that, yeah, it was very.
There was
powerful.
another event that occurred when I was 15. 15 was a big year for me. I joined the Zionist youth movement, and every good Zionist youth movement, the first trip we made was to Washington D.C. And there, in a dingy basement of a hotel, I met Israel's ambassador to the United States. Being very like a lot of chutzpah, I went up and shook his hand. And at that moment, I made a vow to myself. I said, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be Israel's ambassador to the United States.
And you were American at that time.
I hadn't even been to Israel yet. And the ambassador's name was Yitzhak Rabin. And it really was a dream. It was something I stayed with all the time. People asked me what I want to be, when I grew up, or what was my career goal. It was going to be Israel's ambassador to the United States. And later I ended up working for Rabin. I was an advisor in his government.
Well, that's part of what you've done, and
Yes.
I want to talk about your fascinating career, and bear with me here because your resume is quite extensive. You're educated at Princeton and Columbia. You have 4 degrees in Middle East history. You were a paratrooper in the Israeli army and fought in the 1982 Lebanon War and again in 2006 in the Second Lebanon War as well. You're a 2-time gold medalist in the Maccabiah Games for oarsmanship.
Yeah, I'm still rowing.
And in 2009, you became Israel's ambassador to the United States and served until 2013. Then, when you returned to Israel, you were then elected to the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament. And to top it off, you're a 3-time New York Times best-selling author, having written numerous books of both fiction and nonfiction.
You're leaving off the most important things.
What?
Father of 3, grandfather of 6, soon 7.
Oh, wow, Mazel Tov. That is the most important
That is the most
thing.
important, yes.
So when you look back at your fabulous career,
Yes.
what stands out the most to you?
The sense of service. I get from a very early age. I knew I was going to live in Israel, but I was also guided by a strong sense of service. I don't know where it came from. I come from a family of service. Both my sisters are service givers in the health industry. My father was the head of a very large Jewish hospital for 40 years. My mother was a family therapist, so I come from service. I was at a synagogue in Sutton Place last Shabbat. It was for the holiday, and I opened up my talk by saying I'm delighted to be back at Sutton Place. 45 years ago, I began my public life here on Sutton Place as a bartender. And from that moment on, I knew that I would have a life of service because the bartender was a joke. It was funny. But it was true. It's all about service. And whether it be a volunteer at kibbutz or a lone soldier in the army or working with the Zionist underground in the Soviet Union, because I spent time underground, which was a whole different chapter of my life, a very difficult chapter, because I was arrested every day by the KGB every day and interrogated, or serving in various government capacities. It's been about service, and I find a life of service generally is very, very rewarding, but a life of service to Israel and the Jewish people is supremely rewarding. And it goes to this day.
And you truly make a difference doing it. You really do.
I'd like to think so.
You do.
We try.
You do. You recently wrote this book. It's called 2048, The Rejuvenated State, and it's about your vision for Israel on its 100th anniversary. Could you give us a little synopsis of the book?
Well, it grew out of a conversation between myself and the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, about 2 o'clock in the morning, because that's the times we used to talk about books. I was the deputy to the Prime Minister in his office for diplomacy when I was in Knesset. And so we had an opportunity to talk about ideas. And one of the ideas we had was that Israelis are so bogged down in our daily crises. Little do we know what a daily crisis looked like. This was before the war, that we never really think about our future. We really should start thinking about what kind of Israel we want to see on our 100th birthday, which would be 2048. We'd be 100 years old. And what kind of problems do we have to address now in order to ensure that Israel would have a second successful century? So I resolved to write the book, and don't hold back. It would be a very policy-driven, tough book, really tough book, and address some of the most difficult questions we face. The ultra-Orthodox issue in Israel, the Bedouin issue in Israel, education, health, social services, U.S.'s relations, Israel diaspora relations, and
Your
American-Jewish
longest
relations.
chapters on the peace process.
And the longest process on the peace process, because I've been involved in the peace process now for well over 30 years. That's the hardest chapter to write. Think about that. Now the book, if you open it up, is in Hebrew, it's in Arabic, and it's in English. The
Why
English
did you
part is
do
only
that?
80 pages because I think I wanted to be accessible to everybody.
Yeah, it's actually so well done, and it's short and concise, and it's very readable. We have to take our first commercial break.
Okay.
We'll be right back after this brief message. Up next, more with former Ambassador Michael Oren. We talk about Israel's international image problem. That's coming up on Mosaic.
Israel's economic security is at risk. The October 7 terrorist massacre and Israel-Hamas war are having a disastrous effect on small businesses in Israel. Now there's a way for you to help safeguard the financial stability of millions of people. Visit jewishpb.org/loansdonate or scan this QR code to learn about Federation's Israel Emergency Relief Business Loan Program.
Hi, we're back talking with former Israeli Ambassador Michael Oren, who's also a foremost expert on everything Israel. Michael, talk about the misconceptions and the falsehoods that we hear about Israel every day.
Well, it's not just falsehoods, it's that we in Israel inhabit a completely different reality. We inhabit a different universe than so many Americans, and particularly American policymakers at the highest level. You know, in that world, there's a deep belief that the way to counter escalation is to de-escalate. Whereas we know the way to counter escalation is to escalate even higher, to make the other side understand that it's not going to get rewarded for aggression, but it's going to get punished for aggression.
Right.
Right? This I learned, we talked earlier about my growing up in a Sicilian neighborhood. I knew that if I didn't punch the biggest bully in the nose, even at the risk of what that bully could do to me, and that everyone in the neighborhood knew that I was willing to punch the bully in the nose, that I couldn't survive in that neighborhood. It's the same thing with Israel.
Show the strength.
But you have to be able to, the enemy, if in the case of Iran, every time Iran does something terrible, they pay off the Iranians, they're just going to do it again. You know, those of us who are parents know that if your kid wrecks his room, you give him $20, he's going to wreck the room again. That's pretty much American policy toward Iran for a long time. So that's part of that reality. There's the reality that believes here that if you offer the creation of a Palestinian state, somehow the jihadists are going to be happy with it, that Iran's going to be happy with it, Hamas is going to be happy with it. Whereas the reality is, every time you make any progress on the peace process, Hamas, Iran are going to kill everybody involved in it, Israelis and Palestinians alike, because that's been our experience. In that reality, people believe that we can fight an enemy who is hiding behind, in many cases beneath, its civilian population without causing harm to that civilian population. I actually believe that. I asked myself, you know, going back to October, November, and witnessing the changes in American policy toward the war in Gaza, what were they thinking? How did they think this war was going to be fought? And so it's a mystery to me, because we inhabit a different reality. And that reality, in the foreign reality, they don't understand that for Israelis, this is a war of national survival.
And security, yes.
Well, it's not beyond security. It's a national survival. We lose the north, we've lost the country. If we don't degrade Hamas, ultimately people will not go back and live in the south. And if we don't have deterrence power, we'll be attacked again and again. And if we don't prevail over terror, we won't have peace. Because the Arab states who have made peace with us not because they love us. They made peace with us because we're strong. Because we're standing up to their twin existential threats, which is Sunni extremism in the form of Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Shiite extremism, which is Hezbollah and Iran. They're facing that. There's only one country in the Middle East that's fighting both. And if we win, and there's different definitions of what constitutes victory here, but if we win, we're not going to get more war, we're going to get peace. Now, that is a very different reality than the reality you're going to encounter in many halls of Congress and in the White House.
Yeah, why is it that people see the Palestinians as the oppressed or victims and Israel as the oppressors?
Well, you want the honest truth? It has to do with anti-Semitism. The Palestinians, and I don't mean this in any way cavalier, Palestinians got very lucky in history. They had the ultimate enemies. Because when the Syrians were massacring Palestinians, the Syrians massacring one another, nobody cared. Hundreds of thousands of Sudanese are being massacred as we're speaking.
Right.
Nobody cares. Even in the Lebanon civil war, nobody cares. It's the Palestinians. And why the Palestinians? Because their enemies are the Jews. And I've been dealing with public diplomacy for a long time, almost a half a century. And I came to the conclusion long ago that when you look at a headline in a newspaper, what you can hear behind the headline are resonances of anti-Semitic tropes that go back many, many centuries. So, for example, in any war, they'll give casualty figures. And we know that the Hamas casualty figures are inflated, but even if they aren't inflated, they will always be cited, including by the President of the United States, even though...
So why don't they question them? I don't understand. That's one of my questions.
Because the Palestinians have the great enemies of the Jews. They got lucky. So if you break down, say, the 40,000 Palestinians who've been killed, you know that 18,000 were terrorists. You know that out of a population of 2.5 million over the course of a year, 5,000 died by natural causes. You know that several thousand Palestinians have been killed by the 12% of Palestinian rockets that fall short. You deduct all that, and you've got the lowest combatant to civilian casualty rate in military history. When the United States fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was 9 civilians for every combatant killed, at least, sometimes it was much more. And yet we are branded as war criminals. We are branded as genocidal. And not just by people in the street. We've got people in the White House quoting those figures over and over again.
Yes.
Those figures are blood libels. That's classic blood libel. And whenever they cite the figures, they always say, how many are children?
Right.
How many are women? Why? Because Jews killed children. It's the massacre of the innocents from the New Testament. There's a wonderful professor from the University of Pennsylvania, Adi Weiner, who will show you on a blackboard how Hamas's fatality statistics are statistically impossible. Impossible. There's not that many women. There's no men. Only women and children. And it just doesn't work. It doesn't work out mathematically. But it doesn't matter. People are going to cite them over again. Why do they cite them over again? Because we're the Jewish state. And this predated the war. I mean, I would sit in interministerial committees where I would be the bad guy. And we talk about the need to fight about anti-Semitism on campus, and we have a need to fight anti-Semitism on campus. We have a need to fight disinformation in the press. We do. But let us be humble. Let us understand that we are going to be different because we are the Jewish state. And I think this year, that position has been borne out a thousandfold, because just the smallest example, the protests on campus. The protests on campus are fundamentally, irreducibly anti-Semitic, because no one's protesting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. No one's protesting the fact that China has put 1 million Muslims in concentration camps. No one's protesting this.
Right.
And it's only about Israel, and it's only about destroying the nation state of the Jewish people. It's fundamentally anti-Semitic.
It is. And you've said, and I quote, when people say Palestine in America, they mean many different things. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was an important observation. Can you elaborate on that?
When people say Palestine in America, they mean socialism. They mean, weirdly, gay rights. Weirdly. They mean anti-Americanism, very much anti-Americanism. You don't see an American flag being flown at any Palestinian protest. You see a lot of them being burnt and spat upon. They mean anti-nationalism, against any nationalism except Palestinian nationalism. They think all states should disappear, but the Palestinians should have one. Okay. So that's what they mean. Palestinians become sort of a catch-all phrase. By the way, when you say Israel, you also mean many different things. Israel means, it means the West, it means America. It means military strength and standing up for your rights. It means many things.
So how do we draw the focus away from all this misinformation and back to the conversation of state-sponsored terrorism and defeating it?
Well, there's different conversations you can have. It's interesting, the last year has really resolved a fundamental debate that was going on in the American Jewish community, even going on in my family. I try to come back to the United States for Thanksgiving every year. And in recent years, every Thanksgiving, invariably, the conversation around the turkey devolves into a question of anti-Semitism. What should we do about anti-Semitism? As anti-Semitism has risen so starkly in recent years. And I was always the bad guy at the table. I was the nasty Israeli. Someone says something anti-Semitic at work.
The instigator.
No. I was the badass, excuse me. Which would people say, someone said something anti-Semitic at work, you get him fired. You have the exact same criteria that you would use if he had said something against black people or something against gay people.
Right.
You don't give a pass because for hatred against Jews. In my family, though, they would say, no, it's an educational moment. It's a moment where you sit down with the anti-Semite, you explain to him why that's anti-Semitic and why it's hurtful, and you talk about the Holocaust, etc. And I disagreed with this. This last Thanksgiving, everything changed. Because in my family, they understood that for the people out there shouting, from the river to the sea, for the people talking about a global intifada, it's not about education. You're not going to educate these people. You're not going to sit down and tell them about the Holocaust.
No.
And so the conclusion is different. Even the model for fighting anti-Semitism in this country, like ADL, what was the model for years and years and years? Expose them, shame them, right? Mm-hmm. Expose them and shame and educate them.
Right.
These people aren't afraid of being exposed. They're exposing themselves, as it were. All right. They're not
They are,
ashamed
but
of being
they're
anti-Semite.
hiding their faces.
They're hiding their faces because they don't want to lose their jobs. But okay, that brings me to my conclusion. You're not going to educate them, but you can fight them, and that's where the big change is. So I think there's been these sea changes in American Jewish perception. One is that now the debate has been, the question has been concluded. Is anti-Zionism a form of anti-Semitism? Yes. Okay. Can we educate them? No. Can we fight them? Definitely. And we can fight them in ways that we never imagined we could fight them.
On that note,
What?
we have to take our last break.
Oh.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Our conversation with former Ambassador Michael Oren continues as we explore how American Jews can stand up against hatred. We'll be right back.
The Activate Jewish Life movement is a first of its kind, intends to connect with families with children, to connect with teens, to connect with young adults. However people want to engage with Jewish life, we want to make sure that we are providing them with an opportunity to engage in ways that have relevance and meaning for them. What an opportunity we have to change the face of Jewish life.
Welcome back. We're talking with former Israeli Ambassador Michael Oren. Michael, Politico named you as one of the 50 most influential thinkers in America. The Forward lists you as one of the 5 most influential Jews in America, and the Jerusalem Post writes you were one of the 10 most influential Jews worldwide.
Did you ever hear of a non-influential Jew? Really?
Given those accolades, what's the most important message that you feel the American Jewish community needs to hear?
Don't despair.
Ooh, I like
On
that.
the contrary, this moment is a blessing. This is a moment where every American Jew can make a difference by standing up. And there's not many moments like that in Jewish history. This is one of them. And truly make a difference. You can make a difference by fighting against anti-Semitism, because fighting against anti-Semitism today in America is fighting for Israel. And that means you fight in the Churchillian sense. You fight in the classroom, you fight in the courtroom, you fight in the media, you fight in the street. And by the way, American Jews have learned all the different ways they can fight back. Who thought that someday you can oust the president of Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania?
No, it was
Think
very
about that.
powerful.
Very
Yes.
powerful. Who would have thought that? No one would have thought that. So you can give to Federation, which is doing wonderful work in Israel. You can come to Israel and pick fruit and make food for soldiers. There's so many ways you can step forward right now. So to me, this moment is not is not onerous, it's a privilege. And it's a privilege to be able to step forward.
You established an organization called the Israel Advocacy Group. What is it, and why did you establish that?
The Israel Advocacy Group was founded literally around my kitchen table on the morning of October 8th.
Oh.
And with several volunteers, young people mostly, because we realized that the state really wasn't stepping up and defending itself in the international arena, in the media. The state had many failings on October 7th, 8th, and that was one of them. And it really hasn't improved very much. And we had to fill a vacuum very quickly. So Israel Advocacy Group began around the table. Today it's an organization, an international organization, and it works in three areas. It's international media, it's formal mainstream media. When you see me on CNN, you see me on Fox, MSNBC, also BBC.
Which is every day.
Every day, pretty much every day.
Yes.
I'll be on Fox in about another hour. That is through the Israel Advocacy Group. Then there's the non-mainstream media. It's the social media aspect, which is everything from podcasts, webinars, to actually generating media. If you go on YouTube, you'll see that the type of videos we produce, most recently a very big video about the situation in the north. And then finally, the third area is the area that's very close to my heart. It's called Track 2 Diplomacy. Now, what is Track 2 Diplomacy? Is diplomacy not conducted by a state, but by individuals. So what we have done, for example, we were talking about it earlier, it was the summit in Washington, the heads of the former 40 largest Jewish communities, federations in America. We brought you into Washington for a day and a half of very intense seminars on the situation in Israel, which I think you're getting information you weren't getting anywhere else.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I was there, and you were the scholar in residence.
But I was also the organizer who put it together, and then after a day and a half of intense seminars, went for a meeting with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor in the White House. So this is Track 2 Diplomacy, and it's basically running my own foreign ministry, which is good. Unfortunately, I say, because these are gaps in what maybe the state should be doing much better, but it's not. So I don't have time to really wait for the state to do better. We have to go out there and defend the state at all times.
Well, the state of Israel and the Jewish world is so fortunate to have your advocacy, and keep it up. We have to.
Thank you.
We ran out of time. I know. Thank you so
Thank you,
much
Susan.
for joining us, and
Pleasure.
thank you. It's a privilege to sit
Privilege
and
is
chat
mutual,
with you.
believe me.
Thank you.
Bye.
This program is sponsored by Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County.